You're listening to the Blue Angel Phantoms podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Notoff, and I interview former Blue Angel pilots and crew. On this episode of the podcast, I interview former Blue Angels leader, Boss George Daum, from the 1997 and 1998 Airshow seasons. Boss Daum and I talk about a variety of different subjects, including the current COVID-19 crisis affecting the globe and the effect that it's having on the 2020 Airshow season. We also discuss Boss Daum's rise in the Navy and what made him decide to apply for leader of the Blue Angels. Later on in the podcast, Boss Daum talks about some of his favorite maneuvers, including the diamond landing that the 1998 team brought back into rotation. He also shares a funny story about a wasp getting inside a cockpit and some funny flyovers that happened during his time. So if you like the Blue Angels and you like Blue Angel history, then please join me in welcoming Boss George Daum to the podcast. All right, Boss Daum, thanks so much for joining us here on the Blue Angel Phantoms podcast. I know it's hectic times and you're a busy man, so I really appreciate you making time. And I know I had the great privilege of seeing you fly a few air shows in your day, including at Salinas and at Fleet Week in San Francisco. So a huge honor. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for the invitation. I've enjoyed looking at some of your video interviews and podcasts with other former Blues, so I'm really glad to be with you today.
Well, great. Thanks. So, unfortunately, the elephant in the room, we're recording this March of 2020, and it's kind of hard to have a discussion without at least bringing it up. And it's not going to be the focus of this conversation. I actually want it to serve as a distraction, but COVID-19 is really dominating the headlines. And quite frankly, it's had an impact on a lot of people. And I know we both have our good and well wishes for people that are dealing with the economic and health impacts of that. But it's also had some impacts in our friends in the airshow industry, including the Blue Angels, who've had to cancel a good part of the first half of their season and maybe more. So really wanted to get your perspective and insights on what how's the team dealt and what have they dealt with in previous periods, and what do you think that the current team is really focused on during this down period?
Yeah, back during 9/11 and then during the sequester time, the teams had to sort of take a sabbatical, if you will, which can be really frustrating. And I'm sure it's the same for this 2020 team because, they worked really hard during winter training, probably the most intense flying that you can do in order to become a well-oiled machine with great precision. And then to have the first couple months of the air shows canceled is a huge disappointment. I don't know what restrictions they're under right now. But I'm hoping that they're able to continue to fly every day in practice and so forth in order to stay sharp, so that when the air show spigot is turned back on, they're able to hit the road and show the American public what it's all about.
Yeah, hopefully, and I hope they get back in the air real soon. And before we really transition to talking more about your career and your time on the Blue Angels, you have any advice for, look, it's a lot of uncertain times. You seem to be a pretty even kill guy. What's your advice for folks in this very uncertain time period?
Yeah, well, it's certainly quite a time, as everybody agrees. We just don't know how this is all going to go and whether it's a shorter term or longer term impact, and the health and safety of so many people it's going to end up being throughout the country. But I think, what I try to do is just stay in touch with what can I control and what can't I control. And I try not to worry about those things that I just can't do anything about, and just try to focus on the things that I do have control over, and hopefully everything goes well.
Well, I think that's pretty sound advice. Why don't we transition? Start talking about you. Your father was in the Navy, and you grew up in Pennsylvania. I'd have to assume that that had to serve as quite the influence for you pursuing your own Navy career.
Yeah, I grew up outside of Pittsburgh in Western PA, pretty far from the ocean. But my father served in World War II. He commanded an amphibious ship, both in the Pacific at amphibious landings in Africa and Italy, and then later went out to he was in the Mediterranean for that, and then he went out to the Pacific and was involved in some of the amphibious landings out in the Pacific. And so as I was growing up, he didn't talk a lot about his wartime experience like many of his generation, but I knew it was something that he looked to with deep satisfaction and a sense of pride. And Occasionally, he would indicate that he was interested in I have two older brothers, wanting one of us to at least have a military experience, although he didn't really push it. But we were growing up during Vietnam where there was just so much contentiousness and the military wasn't necessarily looked in a favorable light. But anyway, my two brothers elected not to participate in the military, and it came down to me, and I knew how much it meant to him. So I probably made one of the best decisions of my life, other than proposing to my wife, and that was to sign up for an ROTC scholarship, and off I went.
And where did you go to school?
So I went to school at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina.
And I assume through that ROTC program, you eventually did formally enter into the Navy, or?
Yeah, that's right. So I was fortunate enough to get selected for a scholarship because we couldn't have afforded Duke otherwise, and participated in the ROTC program. And then when I graduated, was given orders to go off to flight school, and that started my career.
And you got orders to go to flight school? Was that something that you had pursued to, or tried to manipulate to get into flight school, or is that just what you were assigned?
I wasn't one of these folks that grew up, had any flight experience at all, nor did I have any particular fascination with wanting to be a pilot. But in the summertime during ROTC, you spend 6 weeks on active duty, and between my sophomore and junior year, I got a chance to do a couple weeks in Texas and got some flights in a T-34 and a TA-4 Skyhawk tactical jet. And at that point, I said, I looked around at my friends that were trying to get into graduate school or interview for jobs, and I said, I think I'll just continue on here and see what this flying is all about.
So you got your, I assume flight school went well. Did you take well to it? I've talked to others that said initially, flight school was actually kind of rough and it grew on them, but was it natural for you?
No, not at all. I'm not I have some athletic ability, but I wasn't nearly as a natural pilot as some of the other guys in my class. So I had to work pretty hard throughout in order to get through. So
you eventually got your wings of gold. Where were you eventually deployed for your first deployment?
I got my wings. Went out to NAS Lemoore, California, for training in the A7E Corsair II. And then my first deployment was on the USS Constellation out to the Western Pacific and Indian Ocean.
And many naval aviators always reference how hard it is to land on a carrier. Is that true? And do you recall kind of your experience learning to land on a carrier? And is it as frightening as people say?
Well, there's some things in life a naval aviator never forgets. And one of them, of course, is your first carrier landing, and not just your first landing, but your first night landing. And it's an amazing experience. But just like everything else we do in Navy training, we do a lot of preparation for it, so that by the time you get out there and you see the back end of the ship for the first time, you're well schooled in your procedures and so forth, and you just get down to business and get aboard. But I think maybe your listeners may find it interesting that when you're learning to land aboard the carrier, the first time you do it, you're by yourself. There's nobody in your back seat to take over if you have problems. You are alone in the airplane, even though it's a trainer, two-seater, but you are by yourself. And there may be some pros and cons to that approach, but I'll tell you that when you know the first time you're going to be out there day and night is you're by yourself, it really causes you to pay attention and focus during ground school and in the other flight training.
Great. And so I assume this initial deployment post-Vietnam, was it not a combat deployment, or was it?
Those were what we used to call those good old Cold War days, where it was us versus the Soviets, and so no, didn't see combat. Although on my second tour, we did spend a significant amount of time in the Indian Ocean during the Iranian hostage crisis, being ready to go to execute whatever the National Command Authority decided they needed us to do.
And did you remain an A-7 pilot for that second tour as well?
I did, yeah. So I made 2 deployments in my first squadron in the A-7. I came back to shore duty and was teaching carrier landings as well as other phases in the A-7 training program. And then I got a call one day that, hey, we're standing up some new squadrons with this new airplane, the F-18, and they were looking for somebody who was a training qualified LSO, somebody who helps train and stands back at the back end of the ship at night whenever you're not flying to help the pilots get aboard safely. So that was a phone call I won't forget as I got the opportunity to transition to the new F-18.
And is that the assignment you had when you decided to apply for the Blue Angels, or?
Yeah, I had applied for one of the wingman positions as I was leaving my A-7 squadron, and then applied one more time when I was in the training squadron. But when the orders came along to transition to the F-18, then I headed off to this new squadron, VFA 131, the Wildcats, and off we went on the Coral Sea.
So what made you actually want to apply to be boss of the Blues? And it's interesting because you mentioned you'd actually applied to be one of the wingmen at least a couple times there. I'm assuming your application was not accepted for those?
Yeah, it was one of those things. I never really thought about applying for the Blues until one day when I was coming up for orders from sea duty in VA 146 to go to shore duty, and was having a conversation with the CO of the squadron, and he happened to say, have you thought about applying for the Blue Angels? Yeah, I think you'd be pretty good at that. And that was the first time I really thought about it. So anyway, I applied, and unfortunately I didn't get selected. But over time, as my contemporaries were on the team, I paid attention to what they were up to and how it all worked. And so luckily the timing worked out that after I commanded a squadron, I was eligible to apply to lead the team, and it all worked out.
So talk me through the process of applying for the boss of the Blue Angels. It's different than, say, applying for a wingman. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the Blue Angels and at Top Gun are pretty unique in the Navy in that they have a say in selecting the people that are going to come in behind them. But for the leader, you couldn't have the inmates picking the warden. So the admiral who's the chief of naval air training, who, along with being responsible for all the flight school squadrons, is also responsible for the Blue Angels. He assembles a selection board to pick the leader.
I know today, I think once they get down to a finalist, they make the selection the same day. Is that correct? And was that how your process went?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough, yes, that you go through the interview process and then they make a decision. They deliberate while all the applicants go off to the officers' club for lunch or something. And then when you come back, thankfully, they announce it right away so that if you're not selected, you can get on to other things that you are looking to do.
Did you feel confident when you went through the process, or were you just happy to be a part of the final group of applicants? What were really your feelings during that period?
Well, I think it's one thing that everybody who is a finalist for the team, you just feel so fortunate to be considered. And you look around the room and you see all the other guys that are in the room and you go, wow, the chances of me getting picked are, who knows, right? So you can't go in there expecting to get picked, but you just try to take the opportunity to be able to tell your story, and you hope that things work out. And so I was just very lucky to get picked.
Do you get orders to Pensacola right away after being selected, or is there a down period between selection and when you actually deploy for the team?
So I was still in command of an F-18 squadron, VFA 37. So I went back to the base and back to Jacksonville, Florida, and finished out that tour. I had my change of command was a couple months later, and then moved over to Pensacola. Followed the team for the last month of the Airshow season, and then we had our change of command right after the end of season Airshow in November.
And Boss Wooldridge, who people might recognize from the documentary Around the World at the Speed of Sound that A&E produced from the team in the early 90s, was your predecessor. How important was he for your onboarding? And, I know, because I believe he retired during his actual change of command ceremony, if I recall correctly. So how involved was he in your onboarding?
He was great. Greg Wooldridge, call sign Rug Dance, and I'll let him tell the story someday when you interview him. He was terrific, and is just revered as a Blue Angel leader, having led during 4 different Airshow seasons, coming back 2 times for various reasons, and so it was great working with him and getting to learn a bit about the demonstration and leading the team from him, and so during that last month of the season, before I joined the team officially, took over, I got a chance to fly in the backseat of the number 7 jet in the formation during a practice demonstration in San Francisco. Flew in the slot position with Scott Anderson, and then in the lead solo position with Mark Provo. And then when we got back to Pensacola, Rug Dance and I went out and just by ourselves, because the wingmen hate having the leader be in the 2-seater in the formation. Because of the canopy on the 2-seaters, much bigger than the canopy in the single-seaters, and causes a little bit of instability during loops and so forth. So typically the leader only flies in a single-seater. But we went out by ourselves, and he flew the profiles, and I got a chance to see what it was like, how he did it and so forth, which was very helpful in learning the demo.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting piece of information. To your point, I've never seen, the lead pilot in the number 7 2-seater jet. So that's great information. You joined the team, and as a leader, obviously the scope of your responsibility is much broader than just being a pilot and learning the actual flight demo, if you will. You have to learn operational principles and just how the team altogether, like the maintenance team. Is that drinking from a fire hose, having to take on all that?
Yeah, I often liken being the leader of the Blue Angels to what it must have felt like for Bill Russell when he was the player coach of the Celtics back in the early 60s. Because not only do you have all the positional responsibilities of being the commanding officer, but you got to put the flight suit on every day and go out and climb in the jet and lead the team out there in the airspace. And so that made it, a very challenging assignment, but it was great. And I recognized very early that, as all leaders should recognize, no matter where you are, is that I, as a leader, could have a good day and my team might have an average day, but the team would never have a great day if I, as a leader, didn't have a great day. And so from the very beginning, I just worked as hard as I could to try to fly as consistently and precisely as I could to bring the formation over center point so that the wingmen could show the world what extraordinary pilots they were. That was my job.
So who trains the boss? I've heard from others that typically, in addition to your predecessor, obviously, I think the wingmen have a big responsibility in training you up, despite the fact that you're actually their commanding officer.
Yeah. So it's a little bit unique, uh, quite different from how the Thunderbirds do their training, where the outgoing pilot will actually fly with the new pilot and teach them that particular position. The Blues historically do it very different. I mean, after the change of command and the end of season air show in November, the second year pilots, they're gone, and the new pilots join, and together you figure out how you're going to do this. So typically, Blue Angel number 2, the right wingman, is the one that starts out training the leader. As in Pensacola, you start out not all 6 together, but 2 by 2 by 2, and you're fairly far apart and higher altitudes as you just work on the very basics of Blue Angel formation flying, which for me, the leader, for the first time, you have to learn how to talk and fly at the same time. Because in the fleet, we're very, very, we try not to talk on the radios any more than we absolutely have to. But with the Blue Angels, you're flying so close together that if the wingman waited to see the leader move and then they reacted, it just wouldn't work. We're just too close together. So as the leader, before you move either the stick or the throttles, you're giving a command of preparation and then a command of execution. So the wingmen know what's coming. And then the idea is that everybody is moving the controls at the same time so that you can literally fly as one. So that took a learning curve for me, and I was really blessed. Major Pat Cook was right wingman in his second year during my first year, and he was the one that was that was burdened with teaching me how to do this.
And while you're getting up to speed and you're in El Centro, did you change your physical preparation at all, or just to fly a demo on a daily basis? Did you have to work out more, work out differently, or were you already in the physical condition you needed as someone from the fleet to just hop in and do what you were doing?
Well, I knew that learning to fly the demo was going to be physically demanding, so I showed up in pretty good shape to begin with. But it is, like playing any sport. And so throughout not only winter training, but throughout the season, getting regular physical exercise and eating right and all of that is really important in order to be in shape and ready to go every day.
So then you make it to your first air show, I'm assuming in El Centro. What were your feelings going into that first air show? Were you nervous? Were you just ready to go? Do you remember?
Oh, sure. We're all a little bit nervous for that first show, but the key to Blue Angels training, just like in sports or music or any other highly skilled activity, is practice and repetition. But not just any practice. You hear growing up the old adage that practice makes perfect, but we didn't necessarily believe that. What we believed was practice makes permanent. And so if you're practicing poorly or haphazardly or indifferently, infrequently, then that's the result you're going to get. So what we believed was perfect practice makes perfect. And so we would never just sort of saunter out and climb in the jets and go fly. Even when we were transiting from Pensacola to the next show site, we always marched down, climbed in the jets, went through our procedures and protocols, taxied out, took off in formation, and actually flew in formation, even up at 30,000 feet on the jet airways. Now, I would let them move out a little bit en route, but we were a demonstration team. And so it was a mindset that we needed to maintain. And so our motto was that we're going to practice till we get it right, and then keep practicing till we can't get it wrong. And that is one of the cornerstones to how the Blues can fly day after day, week after week, throughout the year, and do it safely.
Do you have a favorite show site on the circuit during the airshow season, or show sites?
Well, of course, there's the major scenic show sites like San Francisco and Seattle, Chicago, Cleveland's Lakefront Airport, Fort Lauderdale with over 1 million people on the beach that are just spectacular places to fly and places you never forget. But I also thought that the small air show sites, the community air shows, were really very, very cool as well. Salinas, California, the hometown of Sean Tucker, who's probably the greatest living civilian airshow pilot, and I would dare say ranks right up there with Bob Hoover as one of the greatest airshow pilots of all time. And then Liberal, Kansas. I remember we did a show in tiny Liberal, Kansas, which was the home of our frontman, R.C. Hearn. And we just had a great time there, going to the high school football game Friday night and so forth. And of course, a special weekend for me was taking the team back to my hometown area, Latrobe, Pennsylvania, where the team had been for 15 years, and being able to perform in front of my hometown crowd.
Did you have a favorite maneuver when you were the boss? You obviously had the Diamond and the Delta, so what did you look forward to?
I found all the maneuvers were pretty challenging as we tried to achieve perfection every day as best we could. I loved the double Farvel maneuver. It's just the Diamond doing a flat pass by the crowd, but number 1 and number 4, we get to flop upside down, which I always enjoyed that one. The Diamond 360, where by the middle to the latter part of the season, when the air was smooth, we were flying literally just within a couple inches of each other. That was memorable. And of course, the 6-plane dynamic fleur-de-lis and delta loop break cross maneuvers. I could go on and on. They were each one was really pretty special, but each one required just absolute focus in order to get it right.
Was there any one maneuver you challenged you more than any other you didn't look forward to?
I think if you asked the wingmen, they would have said that the most challenging maneuver was the line abreast loop. I'm in the middle, and I've got 2 wingmen on either side of me, and we are literally side by side. So imagine the pilots are looking 90 degrees towards the center of the formation at me as we're going to do a loop. And that's just a really challenging maneuver. If your listeners just think about what it'd be like to drive down the highway with 5 cars lined out next to each other and just going uphill and downhill and turns and so forth. So I think that one was our most challenging, and we always took great satisfaction in getting that one right.
All right. Well, hey, there's a couple famous clips of your team on YouTube floating around out there. I want to ask you about them. The first would be of a diamond landing taking place around 1998 at Miramar. And I guess for context for the listeners, that's a maneuver that more or less went away when the team transitioned from the A4 Skyhawk to the F-18 Hornet, just I think due to the physics of the jet. But there's a clip of your team doing it, and it is quite popular and has gone viral. So what's the origin of that landing? Is that something you guys planned on doing? Did it only happen at Miramar? Did it take place throughout the airshow season?
As a junior officer, I had watched the Blues in the A4, and over time knew most of the pilots, and always marveled when they would end an air show by landing in the 6-plane Delta formation. I even saw one time at a practice show at NAS Lemoore when one of the jets blew a tire, and the pilot I can't remember now which one. I think it was either number 5 or number 6. Had to deploy his drag chute in order to safely separate from the formation as they were rolling out on the runway. And in the early days of the F-18, when it was new, and all new aircraft designs have growing pains, the Hornet had some problems with its landing gear. There's a linkage on the gear that was having problems that when the landing gear were lowered, one of the wheels wouldn't rotate and lock into place. And so the pilot would have to use the tail hook and the wire cable at the runway, just like at the ship, in order to land safely. So when the team transitioned to the F-18s in, I think, 1986, they took that maneuver, the formation landing, out of the show. And because of the landing gear problems, but also because the F-18 doesn't have a drag chute. So if you get into problems, it's difficult for the wingman to get out of the way. But so by the time I got to the team in 1997, the landing gear problems had pretty much been resolved. And each team, particularly when the leader's in his second year, they want to put their own stamp on the demo with some sort of innovation, some sort of change to the show. And that year, Blue Angel number 4, Lieutenant Mark Dunleavy, and I felt strongly that the diamond formation represents extreme teamwork. 4 pilots taking off in formation, flying the show as one, and then landing in formation would be an exclamation point. And so we contacted the folks up at Naval Air Systems Command, the test pilot folks, and asked them to do a risk analysis of the F-18 landing gear malfunctions. And when they gave their okay, we reached back to some of the A4 pilots we knew, like Hoss Pearson and in the lead and Kurt Watson in the slot. And of course, I spent a lot of time talking to Gil Rude. And then during our second winter training, Mark and I would fly a third training flight, and just the two of us. And we went out to see how it would work, first with Mark landing on my wing, and then once we felt that went fine, then landing behind me, because we had experience doing 2-plane formation landings in the fleet, but typically there, each jet just sort of lines up on its side of the runway, but we were planning to land a course much, much closer together. So when that went okay, then Mark started landing in the slot position behind me. And, I never did it because I was always in the lead. But if you think about it, here he would be behind me and below my airplane. So as we'd come in to land, he touches down first. And then these 2 big exhausts are coming down in front of him, right in front of him, and the noise and all of that. Plus, because he lands first, he has to actually add power when he touches down in order to not fall behind me, in order to stay in position. So anyway, he was fearless, and we then added Blue Angels 2 and 3, Scott Wedemeyer and Dave Silkey into the wings, and we just worked on it. And so every time that we were at a show site where the winds were favorable, we landed in diamond, and we were just really proud of being able to put that maneuver back in the demo. And of course, if any of the A4, F4, F11 pilots are listening, we never landed all 6 jets in formation, but we were satisfied to bring back the 4-jet formation landing. And frankly, I don't believe our 2 solo pilots, Scott Bair and Doug Verissimo, I don't think they minded being left out of that maneuver.
And another one that's gone viral is a Sports Center clip from 1998 Chicago Seafair, I believe. And it's the Astros versus the Cubs, and the Blue Angels made quite, I guess, the interruption of the game. And one of the Astro players actually ran off the mound in the middle of the game. Did you guys know that was going on at the time? Was that just, you were just flying in your standard demo and that was just a byproduct?
There's two show sites that I recall that have a Major League Baseball ballpark within the show footprint, within 5 miles of Center Point, that we're cleared to fly in and use to either do the maneuvers or set up behind or in front of the crowd for the next maneuver, and that's Cleveland and Chicago. And funny how both ballparks are right under the flight path that we use to set up for a maneuver we call the Diamond Dirty Loop, where the diamond formation, 4 of us with the landing gear down and the tail hooks down, we do a loop in formation. That day we gave the crowd a pretty good look at 4 blue F-18s with their landing gear and tail hooks down as we flew overhead the ballpark to set up the maneuver. Somebody said the game was protested, I guess by the Astros, but thankfully, I don't recall hearing anything about it.
And YouTube wasn't a thing back then. Did you know you were on Sports Center, or did you find that out much later?
No, we actually, we found out later. But another clip that folks can watch, they may find humorous, is about a surprise flyover that we did of a 49ers game. And that was my first year. We had gotten to San Francisco and we were getting ready to do a practice demo on Thursday. The routine is you do a practice on Thursday, a practice on Friday, and then fly in front of the big crowds on Saturday and Sunday. And so we were getting ready to practice, and Blue Angel number 5, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scholl, now Admiral Scholl, said, "Hey, boss, the 49ers have a game on Sunday." And I'm thinking, oh, that'll be great. We can go check out go to the game and have a good time together and so forth. And he said, "Oh, no, it's an afternoon game." I'm thinking that after we get done with the demo down by Fisherman's Wharf, that we fly over the stadium on our way back to Oakland. And so I thought, wow, I tell you what, how about you call the FAA and find out if they'll approve of a flyover, and then if they say it's okay, then call the 49ers. And if they say it's okay, then we'll talk about it on Sunday. And of course, I completely forgot about it because I was busy trying to make sure that I learned the Airshow site and everything to fly well at San Francisco. And I figured there's no way the FAA is going to approve a flyover of a full stadium of people on Sunday, and we're calling on Thursday. It just ain't going to happen. So sure enough, though, Sunday comes, and Doc says to me before the brief, "Hey, remember we were going to do a flyover today of the stadium?" And I said, "Well, yeah, what did the FAA say?" And he said, "Boss, those guys at Bay Approach, they are great. They said that at 4:00 when we're done at Fisherman's Wharf, that all the banner tow airplanes will be gone, and they'll tell the MetLife blimp to climb to 3,000 feet, and we're cleared in." I said, "Well, great. What did the 49ers say?" And he said, "Boss, they said, bring it on. We want you to rock them in their seats." So we came off, did our final pass by the crowd at Fisherman's Wharf, and came over the Bay Bridge, except instead of rolling the formation out heading south to go to Oakland, I kept the turn coming to southwest, and we did a flyover of the stadium. So if the listeners, if you want to see what that looked like, if you Google the Blue Angels and John Madden, you'll get to see the video clip, because it was being televised by Fox Sports and Pat Summerall and John Madden. And many of your listeners may know that John Madden has a terrible fear of flying. he only would go to games that he broadcast by bus. And he's a pretty excitable guy. So when you watch the videotape, it's pretty humorous.
Yeah, that's one I haven't seen. I'm definitely going to check that out. I was talking to a mutual friend of ours and someone that works with the Blue Angels Association, which you're obviously affiliated with, Laura Bogan, yesterday, and she reminded me of a story of a flyover you did over Pensacola in the Delta Formation where you held the smoke on a little bit longer. Do you know what story I'm talking about?
Yeah, there were a couple flyovers that we did that were memorable. We did a flyover of St. Louis Cardinals game whenever Mark McGuire hit number 61 to tie Roger Maris. That was sort of an impromptu as well. And I can also tell you a sort of a trick we pulled on the Thunderbirds at Battle Creek. But the Pensacola beach show flyover that Laura's talking about is, the last maneuver, we come by the crowd, all 6 airplanes in formation with the smoke on. And then as you fly by the crowd, as you go down the beach, the crowd gets a little thinner and a little thinner and a little thinner. And I'm trying to decide when do I want to call for the smoke to be turned off. And I look down the beach, and there about a mile or so away is a solitary figure standing there. And as we get a little closer, this guy is, he's got cut off jeans, no shirt, scraggly hair, but he's standing there at attention, giving us a salute. And so I left the smoke on until we got next to him and then turned it off to return his salute. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. And you mentioned the flyover of Battle Creek and the Thunderbirds. Would love to hear that one.
Yeah, so we were doing, my second year, we were doing a show up at, let me think, it's the Traverse City for 4th of July weekend. And it just so happened that the Thunderbirds were in Battle Creek, 100 miles or whatever south of us. So we do the show on Saturday, and Saturday night we're all together at a restaurant having dinner. And I asked our ops officer, Blue Angel number 5, Scott Bear, I said, Yogi, call down to Battle Creek tomorrow and see if you can get the Thunderbird waiver, FAA waiver time extended 30 minutes. You see, we need every show site. We need to get a special waiver from the FAA so that we're allowed to fly faster than 250 knots below 10,000 feet and to be able to fly at low altitude over a congested crowd of people. So he calls down there and gets their waiver time extended. And so we fly the show at Traverse City. We land, we do a quick debrief just to make sure if there's any issues that we need to immediately talk about, and then we'll do the rest of it when we get home. We jump into the jets and we launch, and the Thunderbirds, their routine's a little different. They do shows like we do on Saturday and Sunday, but then they stay over Sunday night and they don't go home to Las Vegas until Monday. So they're standing on the show line at Battle Creek signing autographs, and the crowd looks up. And so here we come, and we do we're coming at them head on with the Delta 6 planes with the smoke on. We fly overhead, we turn around and come back, and we do a Delta roll, and then we do a fleur-de-lis, and then we do a flat pass right over the Thunderbird jets, and then head back to Pensacola. So it's a wonderful spirit of friendly competition between the two teams, and I think we really got the best of them that day.
Did they ever prank you back during your tenure?
It's interesting. They did a couple flyovers when they were going somewhere for a show, and they happened to be we were somewhere en route. But the cultures of the two teams are quite different, and it's a reflection of the two services. And we were given much more latitude by our leadership to do things like that spontaneously that unfortunately those guys were never allowed to do. So, yeah, they made a couple flyovers, but nothing like what we did to them in Battle Creek.
So we really can't talk about the Blue Angels without really mentioning the maintenance team, because you guys have never canceled an air show due to a maintenance issue to date. So can you talk about how important they were to your operation, and did they ever have to go way above and beyond the call of duty during your tenure because of some extraordinary circumstance?
I really appreciate you asking that question, because those folks are truly the unsung heroes. I could spend hours telling you how important each and every one was. And not just the maintenance techs, but all of our enlisted teammates in medical and public affairs, administration, in the events office, supply, and first lieutenant. I mean, we could not have succeeded in our mission without all of them working really hard and making it happen. And they really inspired me every day. And I challenge myself to meet the standard that they set for professionalism, teamwork, and dedication, because they were truly the heart and soul of our team. So I could tell you a bunch of stories, changing engines in record time that would make your head spin, or repairing a fuel cell leak in the middle of the night so a jet would be ready for the next day's show. They truly worked miracles every day, because a lot of people don't realize it, but the Blue Angels currently fly the oldest F-18s in the Navy and Marine Corps. And that's because, the young men and women that are flying off of aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, and expeditionary airfields around the world, they need and they deserve to have the newest aircraft and so forth. So it really is a testimony to the dedication and professionalism of the Blue Angel technicians that they're able to keep those mature aircraft flying, ready to go to fly safely every day. And that same attitude and dedication was resident in all the other departments on the team. And in fact, you may find it a year or so ago, we had a reunion of our 97 and 98 teams, our 20th anniversary in Pensacola at the end of season Airshow. And about, roughly 50 of us came together. And I said, okay, you guys have heard enough from me over the years. I want to hear from you. And at 20 years, the statute of limitations are up. So the front man, R.C. Hearn, called on each person individually, and I asked them to tell a story that they remembered from our time together, and to give a shout out to a teammate who wasn't able to attend. And we went for over 2 hours telling amazing stories about what went on. And of course, a lot of it I had no idea, but they worked their magic. So they're the best.
Yeah, they sure are. And like many, I'm a big Fat Albert fan, and I know they've had to swap out aircraft throughout the year and have temporaries. Did you have a consistent Fat Albert C-130 during your tenure, or were you guys essentially playing swap with different C-130s?
Yeah, we were really lucky that we had a C-130 Fat Albert available to us consistently throughout both years. I just can't imagine how the teams here lately, where the C-130 has had readiness issues and hasn't been available for long stretches of time, and the team has had to figure out literally shipping equipment by trailer truck or whatever they could do. How they did it, my hat is off to them. But and not only was Fat Albert a great hit at the air shows, particularly when they flew a demo at twilight with those jet-assisted takeoff bottles, but it was truly crucial to our success. And not just the pilots. On my team, we had Stu Smith and Rob Wunderlich, Dwight Neely and Darren Martin. But the flight engineers and maintenance techs, who I'd love to start naming each one of them, but with my memory, I'll probably leave some out. But getting to the team to the show sites every weekend, on time, every time, made all the difference. But not only that, but if we had to go get an engine because one of the engines got faulted or had needed a generator or something like that, and it wasn't at that civilian show site, those guys would, whatever it took, their answer was always the same: we can do it, and they made it happen every time. Pretty cool.
You're usually flying to and from show sites in your own F-18. Did you ever get to sit in on a JATO takeoff yourself?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was important that I try to experience everything, so I understood what was going on and what the team needed. So yeah, I did take a ride in Fat Albert, and not only was it, of course, amazing to ride in that airplane as it climbs at what appears to be a 45-degree angle, but the crew coordination that was going on in the cockpit among the pilots and the engineers was just really impressive. And they showed me that, those guys were every bit as precise and professional and pushing, trying to do the very best as those of us in the jets.
So I may or may not have heard that previous pilots, demo pilots on the Blue Angels, have had the opportunity to get behind the wheel of Fat Albert on occasion. You ever get to fly Fat Albert?
I did not exercise maybe my command prerogative to take the controls of Fat Albert. So I missed out on that one. Maybe I may need to go back to do that.
Another article I read, and you and I discussed it the other day, you guys actually considered going to China for the 1998 season. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was some talk about that. I think the Chinese wanted us to go and fly in their version of the Paris Airshow or the Farnborough Show, which was sort of a trade show, to highlight aircraft and aviation innovations and so forth. And so, God bless them, our folks did a bunch of planning and cost analysis and all of that of what it would take for us to go over there. And I think the invitation was we were going to go after the end of season air show in November, so it wouldn't affect our schedule per se. And so they did all this work, and we answered the mail, but then ultimately I think it got scrubbed, and I'm not sure exactly why. That was way above my pay grade. We surmised that there was probably some diplomatic thing between the U.S. and China, and maybe there was some concern about, the Chinese getting some, I don't know, by watching us fly or getting up close to the airplanes, there'd be some sort of technology transfer to them. I don't know. But in any event, it didn't happen.
During your tenure, did the team at all leave North America for a demo at all?
No, we didn't. Although my second year, as we were getting the schedule ready for '98, at that time, there were a lot of former Eastern European countries that were, being welcomed into NATO. And there wasn't a lot of money in the budgets, to do a bunch of stuff. And so, of course, I thought, well, how about welcoming to NATO by having the Blue Angels go over and wave the flag? And that was my great idea. But while there was a lot of interest in us doing that, nobody was willing to come up with the money in order to fund our travel over there. So unfortunately, it didn't work out.
And the standard tour for a Blue Angel pilot, with the exception of maybe someone that comes in as the narrator, is a 2-year period. By the time you came to the conclusion of your tenure in the Blue Angels, were you ready to move on to your next role, or were you sad? What were your emotions going into your final air show?
Yeah, well, that was quite a time as that extraordinary tour came to an end and so forth. It was really difficult to leave that special group of people, of course. But I was fortunate enough at that time to be selected to go command an air wing on an aircraft carrier. And so I couldn't help but be eager to get back to the fleet and a green flight suit and fly gray jets.
As the team now is in their last year of the Hornet, they're transitioning to the Super Hornet. Did you ever get to fly a Super Hornet? And how do you think the new Super Hornet will change the dynamic of the current demo that we're used to today?
Unfortunately, I left active duty just as the Super Hornet was coming online, so I missed out on getting a chance to fly that airplane. But, it's been an amazing workhorse for the Navy, and very, very capable. And there's been a lot of work behind the scenes by former Blues who, having recently left the team, have done a lot of work to prepare for the transition. And I think it's going to be pretty cool. The maneuvers, by and large, will be the same with some innovation, but the airplane is 30% bigger and louder, which is always something the crowd enjoys, is they just love lots of noise. So I think it's going to be an outstanding airshow aircraft that's going to carry the team very well for the foreseeable future.
All right, now I got a hypothetical for you. If you could go back in time and fly in any other era of the Blue Angels, what time period would you choose?
Well, that's a tough one. Of course, going all the way back to the beginning with the Hellcat and the Bearcat that your grandfather flew, and starting up the team, that must have been, wow, what a time that must have been, going around to air shows and waving the flag for naval aviation as the Navy's competing for scarce budget money after World War II. And then the F-9, I don't know that much about. The F-11 was a beautiful airshow aircraft, and wonderful stories about that team going over to Paris and flying in the Paris Airshow. The F-4, that's just raw power, noise, and speed. I mean, it's truly an all-American muscle car that was flown only for a few years in the tumultuous late 60s and early 70s. And I've watched videos of those guys, and I don't know how those guys did it, flying that airplane as they did in formation and Blue Angel demos. Man, my hat's off to them. And those guys landed in six-plane Delta, and I think I've even seen videos of them landing in six-plane Echelon, which just incredible. And then you got the A4, the Skyhawk, or as we affectionately called the Scooter, with the roll rate on that airplane was just amazing. I mean, it would roll 720 degrees per second. And with that Delta wing, just a beautiful airshow airplane in formation. And, I have a couple hundred hours in the A4 in flight school and then flying it as an adversary when I was at Top Gun. And believe me, that little tiny cockpit of the A4, you don't climb in an A4, you strap it on, literally. So I have a hard time deciding between the A4 and the F4. But if I could only pick one, and because I've already have some experience in the A4, I'd have to go with the F4.
All right, good answer. Yeah, I mean, if I had to get in my own time machine, I'd obviously go back and want to see my grandfather flying the demo. But other than that, I think it would be I'd love to go see an F4 demo or an A4 demo, just because I've had a privilege of meeting some of those pilots. It'd be wonderful to see those F4s, though, so big, and I love that movie Threshold.
Yep.
All right, so something I didn't give you a prep for in advance here, but I solicited some questions from social media, specifically Instagram, on the Blue Angel Phantoms Instagram account. And so Bryce Cantrell Photography would like to know, what is the most memorable experience of your Blue Angel career? If I had to guess from our conversation so far, maybe it was flying in front of your hometown crowd, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, that was really special, going back home and flying in front of my high school buddies and so forth. That was pretty cool. And I remember when we did the takeoff loop there at Latrobe, as we're on our back, I look up and to pick up the opposite horizon. And there in a farmer's field, somebody had cut into the wheat or whatever they were growing there, welcome blue angels. So that was pretty cool. But there were just so many wonderful memories. In fact, on a personal note, I'd like to tell one story. We were doing a show at Fallon, Nevada. And for those pilots that are listening, you can imagine a hot summer day at high elevation there in Nevada. That's a real challenging show site. And back in the 80s, Mick McTishan, one of the C-130 pilots, had initiated a tradition that I hope the Blue Angels are still doing today, and that is on Fridays after the practice, the team meets with Make-A-Wish children and their parents, which is a very powerful experience. And on this day in Fallon, we were meeting with the Make-A-Wish kids from the area, and this little boy was standing in line, and when he came up to me, he handed me a picture of his sister, and actually she was the Make-A-Wish child, but sadly she had passed away 2 weekends before, and he asked me if I would fly the show with her picture, and it still gives me goosebumps. But the weather conditions were really tough. The wind and the pressure altitude and so forth made that a really challenging show site. But it was really smooth there in my cockpit, and we had a great show that day. And I think that maybe she had something to do with it.
Yeah, wow. Sad, but great story at the same time. Moving on, Cody White from Instagram wanted to know, did you ever get scared at any point in the demo, or did you ever cough, sneeze, or have a hiccup while in flight?
That's a great question. I can't say I ever got scared. You are so busy and concentrating so much. We did have, I don't think I ever sneezed. We did have a couple things happen. Blue Angel number 2, my second year, Scott Wedemeyer on my right wing, he cleared the formation on our takeoff loop one day as we were practicing. And in the debrief, I said to him, well, what was going on there? And he had a wasp or something in his cockpit that he needed to move out and kill. But he moved out, killed the wasp, got right back into formation, and we continued. Another time, we were doing a Delta roll. I think it was at Niagara Falls, and I took a bird on the canopy, which, as you might imagine, was a little bit surprising. I mean, it sounded like a shotgun blast going off when it slammed into the canopy, and most of it went down the left side of the airplane. Luckily, didn't bother the engines and so forth. And while I had a little bit of visibility issues because there was a big blood spot on my canopy, to this day, Dave Silkey, who is on my left wing, buys me a beer whenever we get together, not because I'm particularly cool, calm, and collected, but I just didn't know enough to flinch. And you could imagine if I had flinched whenever that bird hit the canopy, we could have had some issues. So, stuff happens, and you just try to react as calmly as you can in order to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, wow. I could imagine that not being a pleasant experience. Got another question here. There's been some online teasing of the new Fat Albert livery, and it looks to have been given a modern spin, although they haven't shown the full picture of what Fat Albert will look like. What's your take on that? Are you a traditionalist, or are you looking forward to the new paint job?
Yeah, I looked at the picture that you sent me of that, because that's the first I've heard of that. And of course, yeah, I'm one of these grumpy old guys now that, our way was the best way. And so, my first inclination is that I prefer the traditional paint scheme, but I also defer to the current team. I mean, it's their show and their team. And if this is what they think is the best, then then I'm all for it.
Gotcha. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but is there anything we haven't covered today? Anything else you want to share with us that we might find interesting?
Well, I think we've covered just about everything. I just would like to say that oftentimes the blues, as people watch them year after year, they just make it look too easy, and people can't quite appreciate all that's going on behind the scenes in order to make that all happen. And so I just can never help but salute all the teammates that I had in my 2 years who took just great care of me and took care of each other. And they were the ones that were responsible for our success.
Well, this has really been great. I appreciate the time you made today, Boss Tom, and I hope to see you down the line at an air show real soon.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. Good to be with you.
All right, so that wraps up this episode of the Blue Angel Phantoms podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please make sure you are subscribed to the Blue Angel Phantoms YouTube channel and the Blue Angel Phantoms podcast. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. So until next time, everyone, please do me a favor. Stay safe. I'm thinking about all of you, and I will look forward to publishing another interview real soon. Take care.